For spine-chilling true catfish horror stories revealed, the sinister secrets of the haunted online. Sarah had never expected Maplewood, with its sprawling lawns and cheerful families, to become the backdrop of a nightmare. Dark clouds loomed in the sky, casting an eerie shadow over the neighborhood where laughter had faded into muffled whispers. Just last year, her husband vanished. Now, a creeping dread settled over their home, prefacing what was to come. It started as a slight chill in the air, a feeling that something was amiss, but it soon spiraled out of control. Reports of pets disappearing. Lilies faded in their pots. Wails of frightened children echoed through the streets as darkness swallowed the sun. There wasn't just one shadowy figure haunting Maplewood. They felt multiplied, lurking in corners, watching closely. They were the monsters whispered about in urban legends. Sarah's heart raced each time Lily and Jake awoke, drenched in tears, screaming from nightmare-ridden sleep. Their cries sent shivers racing down her spine, a constant reminder that something wicked was waiting just beyond their doorstep. They were caught in an unseen web, and no one seemed to believe her. When she approached the police, the officers exchanged amused glances, calling her paranoid. It felt like she was shouting into a void. Alone, she turned to online support groups, finding hope. The virtual world became a safe haven, where she met Dan. His sympathetic messages were a balm to her broken heart, and his understanding soothed her frayed nerves. Together, they sifted through vanished in Maplewood stories, unlocking the town's dark history that sent chills coursing through Sarah's veins. She never expected that Dan himself might be a part of the darkness she was trying to escape. Suddenly, voices whispering in the night became more than just figments of imagination. They were warnings. Drafty corners of her home transformed into something sinister. Someone else was watching. Could it be Dan? Unease festered in her heart. Old urban legends resurfaced in her mind, tales of those who vanished from internet group strangers leading lives that turned toxic. She felt trapped, caught in a digital snare. Before we continue, I need to tell you something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to their system and many people are missing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and select all notifications so you don't miss future videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps me with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. As the tension mounted, her phone buzzed violently in the silence. A new message flickered on the screen from an unknown user. You don't know who he truly is. A bead of cold sweat trickled down Sarah's back as her breath caught in her throat. The words unfurled into a dark labyrinth of confusion. Each pulse of her heartbeat echoed like a countdown. Who was she trusting? Dan, or this ominous stranger? She had to find out. The Miller Center catered to every ghost story that Maplewood had buried, so rich with urban lore, it could hold the truth. As Sarah stepped into the derelict hollow of that forgotten place, shadows danced on the walls, and the air crackled with unease. She gripped her phone tightly, the frozen screen reflecting her wide eyes. She was no longer just a grieving mother. She was a woman ready to unearth the horrors lurking just beneath the surface of her quiet life. The hunt for answers had turned into something else, something infinitely darker, and she could feel a pair of hidden eyes tracking her movements. Was she following a clue or walking straight into a trap? As the door creaked shut behind her, the true terror was only just beginning. The silence inside the Miller Center felt alive, thick and pulsating, wrapping around Sarah like a suffocating blanket. Her eyes darted across the darkened corners, searching for a flicker of movement, any sign of the horrors the town had whispered about for decades. Dust motes lazily drifted in the pale shards of light seeping through cracked windows, oddly tranquil against the sense of dread gnawing at her gut. Her heart hammered in her chest as the door behind her clanged shut with a finality that echoed a door sealing her fate. Shadows layered against the peeling wallpaper seemed to pulse, swelling with the burden of history. They were not mere shadows, they were memories, secrets begging to be released. Taking a deep breath, she stepped forward, the floorboards creaking underfoot, a chorus of groans beneath her cautious steps. Her phone vibrated again, slicing through the silence. The screen illuminated her face, revealing a new message: "They are watching you." The hairs on the back of her neck bristled, and she glanced back toward the door, half expecting to see familiar shadows staring back at her. Sweat began to bead on her brow as a sickening dread settled deep in her stomach. She couldn't shake the feeling of eyes crawling over her skin, probing. Not wanting to be frozen by fear, Sarah turned her focus back to the remains of the center. Old photographs lined the walls, faces of Maplewood's past gazing out at her, smiling grotesquely as if they knew more than they should. She squinted at one image, a family standing proudly in front of the church, but the little girl on the far left bore an uncanny resemblance to Lily. A chill crept up her spine. Had they been connected to the darkness that had swallowed her family? Suddenly, a loud thud echoed from behind a closed door at the end of the hallway. Adrenaline surged through her. Was it the wind? An animal? Or something else entirely? The thud was followed by a series of low, guttural whispers, fluid and unsettling. She couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable, a beckoning, inviting her toward the door. Temptation warred with her better judgment. She felt tethered. If she didn't investigate, would she forever wonder what lay behind? Gripping her phone like a lifeline, she approached the door. With a heavy exhale, she pushed it open, wincing as the hinges screamed in protest. Inside, the room was dim, filled with old furniture and layers of dust. A tattered journal lay open on a table, as if someone had just been poring over its pages. The scrawled handwriting hinted at a madness that reverberated through the years. "This is where they keep you trapped," it read, punctuated with frantic scribbles that swirled in chaotic patterns, almost drawing her in. Panic clawed at her throat. Who were they? And what secrets did this journal hold? As she leaned in closer to decipher the swirling madness, the whispers grew louder, transforming into chilling laughter. It echoed against the wooden walls, drowning out her thoughts. Something inside her cracked open. In one haunting realization, she understood. They weren't just watching, they were waiting. Then, a sudden rush of movement flickered beside her. She turned, and her breath hitched as she caught sight of a figure, draped in shadow, just beyond the threshold, eyes gleaming with an unholy light. Was it Dan? Or the ominous stranger? "Sarah," it hissed, voice curling into her mind like smoke. The room felt like it was closing in as the laughter intensified, twisting into a sinister symphony of dread. She stumbled back, heart pounding. The question clung to the air, desperation clawing at her: could she escape whatever sinister fate awaited her in this haunted past? As the figure stepped closer, she crashed against the table, scattering papers in her wake. The bright flash of her phone screen cut through the darkness, a notification from Dan: "I'm here, I can help." But as Sarah's eyes darted between the lurking figure and her phone, the weight of her choices pressed down. Who could she trust? Was Dan the light in this darkness, or just another shadow waiting to swallow her whole? Panic surged through Sarah as the shadowy figure advanced, the air around her thickening with dread. Her heart raced, pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribcage. The whispers escalated, morphing into a cacophony of malevolence. The walls seemed to pulse, as if ready to close in on her, trapping her forever in this basement of horrors. "Sarah." The voice slithered into her mind, its tone a sickly sweet poison. It was not Dan, she was certain of that. Whatever this thing was, it wanted her, and she instinctively knew it wasn't interested in help. She took a step backward, her mind racing for a plan. The tattered journal lay discarded on the floor, pages fluttering as if caught in a tumultuous wind. Answers may lie within its maddening scrawl. But did she dare reach for it? The figure paused, and the laughter faltered momentarily, giving her a flicker of hope. The creature's eyes glimmered ominously, reflecting something deep and unearthly. It beckoned her, fingers curling as if to welcome her into its dark embrace. Suddenly, she bolted toward the journal, fingers brushing the edges of its pages, searching for the truth among the chaos. She could feel the entity's breath, cold and rancid, whispering dark promises into her ear, warning her to stop, to give in. "Don't you want to know the truth?" it hissed, an echo of Sarah's own fears. Memories of her childhood flooded back, fragments of forgotten conversations with her mother about the center, about the town's secrets. Who was in the photographs? Why did they seem so familiar? "And no," she stuttered, her voice scarcely above a whisper. With trembling hands, she opened the journal wider, eyes scanning the frantic words. Lily was chosen, the words twisted together, almost mocking her. "They take you when the stars align." A chill slashed through her gut. Was that why she had felt drawn here? A connection to her missing sister? The shadow moved closer, dread coiled inside her like a snake ready to strike. "Sarah," it crooned, almost sweetly, "come play with us, you'll never leave." Fear electrified her as she slammed the journal shut. The laughter stopped, replaced with suffocating silence. Had she triggered something? The absence of sound pressed down on her like a weight. She stole a glance behind her and saw the doorway flickering in the peripheral of her vision. Freedom, if she could just reach it. But the figure stood between her and salvation, twisting into grotesque shapes as if constantly shifting and reshaping itself. "Run," an echoing voice seeped through her mind, faint but familiar. Dan. But where was he? She turned sharply, eyes wide. Her instincts screamed to flee, to break away from the blackness that threatened to overtake her. Adrenaline surged as she sprinted for the door. A hand, cool and clammy, grasped her ankle, dragging her toward the shadows. "No! Let me go!" she screamed, raw panic splintering her voice. With sheer will, she kicked free and stumbled toward the threshold, the doorframe looming like the gates of hell. She felt the intensity of the whispers pulsing behind her, like 1,000 frantic hearts begging her to stay. Foot on the threshold, she hesitated. A sinister laugh reverberated in her ears. "You can't escape what you are." Taking a deep breath, Sarah leapt through the doorway and fell onto the dusty floor beyond, surprised at the heat of the sunlight kissing her face. But a glance back revealed the room had transformed into a mirrored surface, reflecting not just her fear, but her deepest insecurities. Before she could analyze what had happened, her phone buzzed once more, jolting her from the time loop of dread. She swallowed hard and looked at the screen. "If you're there, I'm here, it's time." The shadows of doubt crept forward as the surface shimmered again. Was Dan truly there? Or was it another trap? A final wisp of laughter floated out from the mirrored door. The darkness behind Sarah whispered, wrapping around her ankles like spider silk. What did it mean? Could she trust Dan, or was she only inviting another shadow into her life? Sarah scrambled to her feet, her heart hammering as she wrestled with the dread oozing from the mirrored door behind her. The sunlight felt like a thin veil against the oppressive darkness she had escaped, but she couldn't shake the feeling that it was only the calm before the storm. With bile rising in her throat, she glanced at her phone again. Dan's message flickered in front of her eyes, a lifeline wrapped in uncertainty. Clenching her jaw, she tapped back with shaking fingers, "Where are you?" Moments felt like hours, her breath quickening with every passing second. She could almost hear the laughter echoing from the door, taunting her, mocking her urgency. Was this truly just a text from him, or was it the shadow trying to pull her back, twisting Dan's voice into something sinister? "Sarah!" The distressed shout was from somewhere behind her. A voice she recognized. Dan! Relief washed over her, yet the echo of despair that had just chased her rang too loudly in her ears. Hesitating on the threshold, she took a deep breath and turned toward the source of the voice. Her heart squeezed painfully as she spotted him stumbling from the shadows of the building, his face pale and drawn, eyes wild as he reached out for her. "Sarah, we have to go. It's all connected," he shouted, breathless, panic stealing the steadiness of his voice. "What is going on?" she cried, urgency clawing at her throat. "Not here. We'll talk outside." Just he took a step forward, glancing nervously back at the door. "We're being watched. We need to leave now." The urgency in his voice sent icy fingers down her spine. She glanced back, half expecting to see the shadow slithering around the doorframe, but the mirror reflected only her frantic expression. "Come on. They won't let us go easily," he urged, the fear in his voice breaking through the fog in her mind. She nodded, her body moving before her brain fully processed. Together, they dashed away from the building, hearts racing, legs pounding against the asphalt. The daylight felt harsh against her skin, but at least it was real, a sharp contrast to the nightmarish gloom they had escaped. Once they reached the safety of the trees bordering the property, Sarah turned to Dan, her voice urgent. "What do you mean it's all connected?" His gaze flickered back toward the building, swallowing hard, as if summoning a wall of courage. That night when Lily disappeared there was a gathering. The townsfolk, his voice trembled, they were doing something. A ritual of sorts. Kissing the shadows. It's like they knew what they were doing. Sarah felt the world tilt under her feet. "What? You were there? Did you see her?" "I didn't see her. I wasn't supposed to be there. But I caught snippets, whispers. They take the chosen ones, Sarah. They do it every 20 years on the night of the alignment. That's why you felt the pull." Her head spun. Shock mixed with anger surged within as memories washed back her mother's frantic warnings, the locked basement door. "You knew about this, didn't you?" she accused, breath hitching. "You knew something and didn't tell me?" "No. I swear I found out too late." Dan stepped closer, urgency knitting his brow. "But we need to act before nightfall. If they want you, they won't stop. You're marked." Before she could respond, the air around them thickened, a heavy silence descending as the shadows from the tree line flickered unnaturally. "What?" Dan started, but something shifted in the distance. A figure, cloaked in darkness, began moving toward them. It was unmistakably human yet inhumanly distorted, a mockery of every tiresome figure they had ever known. "Run!" she screamed, panic surging through her veins. They bolted deeper into the trees as the laughter erupted behind them, a relentless echo that chased them through the underbrush. But there was nowhere to hide, and the sinister whispers and the dark figure followed, promising despair cloaked in malevolent glee. "Dan!" Sarah cried, desperation coating her every word. "What do we do?" He panted heavily, glancing back at the approaching figure. "We fight back or we find the truth. Or we become part of it." As the figure drew closer, its elongated shadows began to twist into familiar forms. Faces from her childhood photos glared back at her, twisting her feelings into screams. Sarah's breath hitched in her throat. Was this all a trap? And how far could they run before the shadows claimed what was theirs? Just then, the forest grew unnaturally still. All sound ceased. And a new laughter echoed all around them, promising that this was only the beginning. What had they awakened? The laughter throbbed around them, a living thing slithering into Sarah's bones. She tried to focus on her breathing, but it felt like every inhalation was saturated with dread. The woods had swallowed the sunlight, closing in on her like a predator. "Keep moving," Dan urged, pulling her further into the trees. Twisted branches loomed overhead, clawing at the sky. The laughter rang louder, mixing with whispers that grazed her ears, each one curling around her mind like a serpent. "They want you, they want us," Dan panted, his words barely breaking the rhythm of pure terror surging within her. She could feel it too, a malignant energy spiraling around them, tightening its grip. As they sprinted through the underbrush, she caught a glimpse of the figure again. It was faster now, gliding rather than running, its lost faces morphing into grotesque smiles, eyes filled with unholy longing. Her heart raced faster. Dan, we can't outpace it. What do we do? We need to find that gathering. The source. If we can disrupt whatever ritual they're planning. His voice trailed off, filled with anguish and fear. But what if they were too late? Where? She cried, choking back fear. The laughter crescendoed, echoing through the woods like a siren call. Back to the clearing. Dan replied, his brow furrowing with desperation. If we make it there, perhaps we can oust its hold. And just like that, a surge of hope mixed with horror propelled them forward. They veered sharply, the world around them a blur of green and brown. Branches snagged at Sarah's clothes, tearing the fabric, ripping into her skin as she pushed through. The shadows were darker here, pooling into corners that could swallow whole towns. Suddenly, a scream erupted around them, not just any scream, but a symphony of sorrow. Faces of the missing, the lost, twisted in agony, filled the air as they flitted past her mind. Memories she never lived began to haunt her, images of townsfolk, of laughter transformed into madness. Sarah, don't look! Dan shouted, pulling her arm, but the visions clawed at her heart. She could swear she saw Lily, her expression contorted in terror, begging for release. Dan, I can't! Sarah cried, tears streaming down her cheeks. No! You can't give in! He shouted back, gripping her tighter. Focus! We're almost there. They crashed into the clearing, a strange sense of calm washing over them for a moment. The ground beneath was uneven, weeds choking the air where it should have been alive. Yet, as the shadows pulled at the edges, Sarah understood they weren't safe. In the center of the clearing stood a stone altar, ancient symbols carved deep into its surface, pulsating under shadowy light. It was the heart of the ritual. What now? Sarah gasped, looking around, trying to catch her breath. We have to destroy it. Dan yelled, moving toward the altar. But as his feet hit the ground, the earth shifted, and shadows screamed, swirling violently around them. No! They were spinning in chaos, and all Sarah could do was tighten her grip on Dan's hand. If we stay, we'll become part of it. I'll find a way. He shouted back, determination sparking in his eyes. Suddenly, a voice broke through the cacophony. It was low, resonant like ice scraping against glass. The lost will return, and the marked will join. The shadows surged forward, coiling around Dan and Sarah, dragging them closer to the altar. The earth soaked up their fear, feeding the ancient presence awakening beneath them. Sarah opened her mouth to scream, but it didn't escape. All she could do was stare at the altar, fear paralyzing her mind. An overwhelming awareness settled in her bones. They weren't just being hunted, they were bait. As the shadows enveloped them, Sarah felt a chilling clarity. The ritual wasn't just a gathering. It was a trap, weaving them into its fabric, a promise of despair that had been waiting for decades. Sarah! We have to. Dan's words cut off as the darkness clutched tighter, stealing their voices. But before she submitted to the abyss, Sarah's eyes locked onto the altar's symbols. They glowed with a hidden meaning, a pulse reverberating like a heartbeat. What if she felt a flicker of hope ignite within her? What if we can break it? Just then, the figure from before emerged, towering and twisted, its laughter echoing through the clearing. It raised a hand, and the shadows tightened around them with an unmistakable hunger. Dread wrapped its fingers around her throat. Could they break free before it was too late? The entity grinned wider. Time is running out, it whispered, and the shadows twisted into menacing shapes, promising that their fate was deeply intertwined with the darkness. As each breath drew closer to an end, Sarah knew she had to act, and fast. But could they really alter the course of the ritual? What awaited them if they failed? The shadows tightened their grip, a cold embrace that made every muscle in Sarah's body freeze. Panic clawed at her throat and she could barely think. Fear blurred her vision, making the altar shimmer and ripple like a mirage. "Dan, we need to break the cycle," she shouted, her voice cracking. The laughter echoed around them, and every issuing sound felt like a tangible force, tugging at her sanity. Dan struggled against the tightening darkness, his face set in grim determination. "How?" he yelled over the cacophony, his eyes scanning the altar, the pulsating symbols almost mocking them. "If we can just there's got to be something." Sarah's heart raced. The symbols were drowning out her thoughts, shifting, creating words she couldn't understand. Each beat echoed memories of those lost, flickering through her mind like a projector gone haywire. Suddenly, she felt a surge of warmth, an unmistakable pull towards the altar. "The symbols, they're alive!" she exclaimed, a realization piercing through her panic. "If we connect with them we might stop it." "But how?" The shadows screamed louder, as if sensing her will to fight back. They surged up, hissing, as if alive with rage. "I can try. I can reach for them." Sarah felt her heart fluttering like a trapped bird in her chest. "Do it," Dan urged, urgency etched into every line of his face. "You have to reach for the light." As dread clawed at her throat, Sarah closed her eyes, willing every ounce of fear to dissipate. She could feel the cold shadow press against her skin, but deep within, she summoned something warm and fierce, a memory of laughter, of friendship, of the strong bond that once connected the townspeople. With a deep breath, she stretched her hands towards the glowing symbols. "Please," she cried out, her voice hoarse yet resolute. "Let us remember." Light erupted from her palms, bright and blinding, illuminating the darkness around them. The symbols responded, glowing brighter, almost vibrating with energy. The laughter morphed into frantic whimpers, the shadows recoiling like wounded creatures caught in headlights. Suddenly, Dan was beside her, his own hands reaching for the altar. "Let us channel it together. We can break this trap." Fueled by desperation, they closed their eyes, focusing on the warmth flowing through their hands, a connection not just to the altar, but to every life entwined with their own, all those who had suffered in this nightmare. But the entity's laughter morphed into something more sinister, a deep rumble like thunder. "You cannot stop what has been set in motion," it bellowed, a sound that reverberated within their bones. The ground trembled beneath them. Shadows spiraled upward, swirling like a storm, drawing closer, attempting to snuff out the light Sarah and Dan had conjured. "Fight it!" Dan shouted, his voice strained but full of resolve. "Don't let darkness swallow us." The warmth from the altar pulsed stronger, but it was an uphill battle. As the shadows clawed for dominance, Sarah felt a fracture in her focus, a slippery dread wrapping around her heart. She could feel every lost soul within the shadows, their anguish mingling with her own. The symbols began to flicker, and with it, their hope wavered. "No! This is our moment!" Sarah screamed into the howling darkness, and with that, she drew from every flicker of clarity she found the laughter of her friends, the warmth of community. "You will not take us!" With renewed vigor, she and Dan locked eyes, their emotions igniting a blazing fire. They combined their will, an explosion of light that surged from the altar like a comet scattering the night. But as the shadows screamed, a rift opened. Sarah's breath-caught faces emerged within the dark, not just lost souls, but those who had tried before them. "Sarah! Dan!" they wailed, stretching fingers towards them. "Help us!" The ancient magic thrummed violently, unstable. Swirling shadows threatened to swallow everything. What they saw was no mere illusion but the echo of a truth too horrifying to ignore. Could they pull these lost souls from the abyss, or would they join them as more offerings to the ritual? "Don't look away!" Dan shouted, even as shadows clawed at their limbs, desperation raw in his voice. It all came down to one moment: act now, or be trapped in a cycle of despair for eternity. With every ounce of strength, Sarah leaned into the light, calling out to all the lost, "We will not let you fall. We'll break the darkness together." The altar roared back fiercely, shadows swirling violently around them. The ground shook beneath their feet as the entity's laughter morphed into a shriek of rage. But was it enough? In that split second, the shadows lunged toward them, and the altar's glow flickered pitifully as darkness loomed ever closer. Sarah could feel everything slipping away. The question lingered, heavy and foreboding: would they all fade into the abyss, or was her fading light enough to break the cycle? With uncertainty clawing at her heart, she knew, the moment of reckoning was at hand. But who would pay the price? And who would emerge? Light fought fiercely against the encroaching darkness, but it flickered like a dying flame. Sarah's heart raced as the shadows closed in, tendrils snaking around her limbs, cold like the grip of death itself. She and Dan struggled to hold on to the waning warmth, their resolve teetering on the precipice of despair. "Sarah! Focus!" Dan's voice sliced through the chaos, grounding her momentarily. She opened her eyes, feeling the shadows tightening their grasp, tasting the chill that threatened to freeze her heart. In that suffocating moment, Sarah recalled every face that had been lost, the townsfolk, the laughter that once filled the streets. "We have to remember who we are," she shouted, feeling the rush of determination fuel her voice. "We can't let them take us. Then let us give them back what they stole." Dan's eyes were wild yet fierce, a spark igniting her own fire. The shadows hissed and writhed as Sarah and Dan reached deeper into their memories, pulling forth fragments of joy. The warmth spread through her hands, merging with Dan's strength. As they held onto each other, the glowing symbols surged with life, throbbing rhythmically with their hearts. Together, they said in unison, their voices echoing against the consuming darkness. The air vibrated with energy, and the ancient symbols responded, pulsing brighter, resonating with their combined force. A brilliant beacon sliced through the shadows, pushing back, illuminating the faces of the lost. Each flicker of light unveiled a nightmare, but also a connection, a bond that extended beyond time. "Help us!" The voices wailed, desperation lacing their cries. They reached out, fingers ghostly thin, longing for a touch, for release. But shadows loomed, shifting, swirling as if alive. They didn't want to let go. The sinister energy coursed through the ground, urging Sarah and Dan to yield. "Fight it!" Dan urged, his voice strained, the flimsy barrier beginning to bend. Yet, Sarah could feel something deeper tugging at her. The cold tendrils weren't simply pulling her away, they were whispering, filling her mind with horrific visions of what lay beneath the altar. Images of the sacrifice, the pain, the endless hunger of the entity that thrived off despair. "No!" she cried out, pushing the thoughts aside. "We have to save them." With that conviction, Sarah dived deeper into the light, weaving through memories, pulling strands of hope from every joy she could remember. With each flicker, the altar swelled brighter, the shadows around them recoiling as screams filled the air, echoing of anguish turned to fury. The darkness snapped and flickered, as if it was about to explode. They were so close. Yet the shadows clawed back with an inhuman howl, a desperate attempt to reclaim their lost power. "Let go!" Dan yelled, pulling Sarah closer to the altar, their energy intertwining, radiating a desperate glow that threatened to explode. The rift pulsed ominously, and Sarah locked eyes with the lost souls. "We will break this," she promised, her voice breaking through the haze of sorrow that clouded the air. "We will not leave any of you behind." But the shadows surged again, fierce and ravenous, black tendrils wrapping tight, their pressure climbing. The voices wailed with pain. Sarah felt each cry straight through her bones. What if they were too late? The altar's glow dimmed, and panic surged. Was this truly the moment of reckoning? "I want to let you take us," she screamed, pushing back against the darkness with all the fervor she could muster. In that split second, the darkness shook violently, shattering a piece of the memory, exposing the entity at its core, a grotesque figure formed from anguish and loss, eyes glimmering with malice. Would they break the cycle, or would they become just another piece of the darkness? The shadows shrieked, and Sarah braced herself as the rift yawned wide, threatening to swallow their light whole. With a final cry, she stretched her hand forward, the ultimate test. Dan, hold on tight. But as she reached toward the abyss, a chilling thought gripped her heart. When the final light faded, what would they become? The darkness lunged at them, and Sarah felt the terrifying pull of the void. The void pulsed, a black maw hungry for their light. Sarah felt a surge of panic as the shadows closed in, a cacophony of shrieks clawing at her mind. She could almost taste the despair, thick and bitter. Dan, she gasped, her voice barely cutting through the chaos. He squeezed her hand tighter, his grip reassuring but trembling. Their eyes met, a flicker of determination sparking between them, though the pull of the void began to feel overpowering. We can't give up. The light is still there. Dan shouted, even as the shadows writhed like serpents around them. With a rush of adrenaline, Sarah refocused. She thought of the townsfolk, their faces, their laughter, the warmth of shared memories. She dug deep into that well of joy, and suddenly, she was floating in their memories, the shadows momentarily retreating. Joy surged through her, filling every corner of her fraught heart. Remember. She shouted, pouring all her will into the words. Remember the love. The laughter. We have to rally them. The spectral faces of the lost began to swirl into view around her, flickers of recognition amidst the darkness. Their hands reached out, a chorus of silent pleas enveloping Sarah and Dan. It was intoxicating, this connection, and yet terrifying as the shadows recoiled, snapping and hissing. Feed off this. Sarah shouted, pouring her strength into the air around them. She lent Dan her belief, their memories weaving a tapestry of light strong enough to push back against the encroaching dread. But the entity reacted. It lunged, a mass of grotesque limbs writhing as a monstrous howl erupted from its depths. The shadows thickened again, doubling down on their attempt to drag Sarah and Dan into despair. The air crackled with a growing tension, an electric undercurrent of ancient malice. Fight it. You have the power. Dan yelled, the fear in his voice fueling her resolve. Together, they thrust their memories forward, a surge of light that illuminated the air, stark against the creeping shadows. Suddenly, a piercing vision hit Sarah, a flash of the altar, the ancient markings burning her eyes. The entity's true form flickered in her mind, revealing its insatiable hunger, but also the path to their salvation hidden within the darkness. She sensed something, an echo of a sacrifice not fully realized, a loop of despair needing to be broken. Dan, we have to break the cycle. She yelled, her pulse racing. We have to reclaim what it has taken. He nodded, fierce determination evident in his eyes. But how? By facing it. She screamed, heart pounding. Together, they launched their focus at the entity, putting every shred of strength into their combined light. But as they pushed forward, the shadows screamed, an echo of anguish that rattled their bones and poured ice into their veins. Then, just as they felt the surge of power, a jarring pain struck Sarah's chest. It was like a spear piercing her, pulling her towards the altar where the monstrous figure seemed to beam, beckoning. Doubt clawed at her thoughts. Had she made a mistake? Sarah! Dan cried out, panic tinging his voice. With fingers trembling, she glanced at the altar, the dismal memories swirling around it, threatening to consume her. Those lost souls, they deserved freedom, but was this the way? Let them go. Sarah shouted, her voice wavering, but resolute. You have to let them go. This ends tonight. The shadows roared in fury, the entity's eyes flashing crimson with rage. Freedom had a price, and as the light seemed to pulse brighter, the sharp pull of doubt twisted within her mind. Hold on. Dan yelled, their hands still clasped tightly together. But as the shadows closed, something deep within the void whispered a chilling revelation: the cycle did not only consume the souls. It demanded its permanence. Would their light be strong enough to confront the darkness, or would they too become part of the entity's eternal feast? The altar trembled beneath them. One more push, one final moment to confront the past or be dragged into endless night. As the rift widened ominously, Sarah gritted her teeth. We can't fail. But deep down, the fear clawed back. What if defeat meant joining the shadows? And then, just as the final light began to flicker, she heard it, the faint sound of laughter echoing through the abyss, but twisted and wrong. What were they truly about to unleash? The laughter reverberated through the swirling shadows, distorted, eerie. It curled around Sarah like a sickening caress, pulling her deeper into the void. Her heart raced. That laughter, it was familiar, yet it twisted her stomach in knots. Sarah, focus. Dan's voice cut through the chaos, anchoring her momentarily. He pulled her back towards their shared light, but the darkness threatened to swallow them whole. The shrieks intensified, each one like icy fingers trailing down her spine. She could feel the undisguised horror gathering around them, as if it could pull them apart at any moment. What if we're wrong? Sarah whispered, doubt gnawing at her resolve. What if we can't win? Then we fight anyway. Dan declared fiercely, eyes alight with defiance. He pushed forward, gathering the remnants of their memories, charging into the gathering shadows. Gritting her teeth, Sarah felt that spark of hope again. They had shared so much, every laughter, every tear, every moment of bravery. She concentrated, drawing the warmth of those memories around her like armor. But the shadows responded, suffocating her light. They rolled in like thick smoke, blocking her path, teasing at her mind. Remember the ones we lost. Dan shouted, raising his chin defiantly. Reclaim their light, Sarah. She swallowed hard. What if reclaiming meant risking it all? What if the sins of the past dragged them into the void? But what choice did they have? They couldn't just stand there, wait to be devoured. Taking a deep breath, she called forth every flicker of joy they had ever known. Together, Dan. With a roar, they hurled their light into the abyss. The darkness recoiled, twisting as if in pain. For a moment, the room shimmered, and the grotesque figure of the entity manifested, their own darkest fears taking shape. Shadows undulated around it, and as the light met the darkness, the creature shrieked, ripping through Sarah's mind like a jagged knife. Don't falter. Dan yelled, teeth clenched. But the shadows stirred violently, the laughter echoing again, this time as a shrill mockery. From the depths of the void, a voice laced with sinister sweetness slithered into Sarah's ears. How sweet it is to see you here, again. The horror seeped into her bones. It was a voice not yet forgotten, a voice of one who had tried to warn them once before. Sarah, we need to push, now. Dan urged, wide-eyed. She nodded, shuddering under the weight of the laughter that seemed to snake around her wrist, binding her to the altar. She fought against it, their light brightening defiantly. But the entity surged, a mass of anger and darkness. A painful cry tore from Sarah's throat as she felt herself slipping, being pulled towards the altar, the grotesque figure beckoning her with clawed hands. Fight it. Dan's voice pierced through her haze. Remember why we came. In that moment, a surge of clarity washed over her faces of the townsfolk who had vanished, their joy, their warmth. They had to stand again. They had to break the cycle. With a fierce determination, she thrust her light forward once more, Dan's desperate energy pumping alongside her. We choose to remember. She shouted. We choose to fight. The shadows writhed, damning their essence, but their resolve hardened. For once in their lives, they wouldn't back down from despair. The laughter changed, a genuine echo of incredulity now layered beneath the malicious tones. Had they really awakened something truly sinister? But just as hope surged, a terrible crack split through the air. The altar shattered, and the room quaked beneath them. A wave of darkness engulfed them, a churning mass demanding tribute as everything blurred. "Trust in your light," Dan shouted, but as the rift widened, an ominous whisper crawled into Sarah's mind, chilling her blood. You cannot escape your destiny. In that moment of fear, she was struck with realization. What if it wasn't just the cycle they had to confront? What horrors awaited them beyond the veil of darkness? Would this be their end, or just the beginning of a new nightmare? The uncertainty hung in the air like a storm cloud, heavy and suffocating. They had opened a door, but to what? As darkness gripped tighter, Sarah held on to Dan, bracing for what was about to unfold. What truth lay behind the door they had dared to open? Light erupted from the shards of the altar, casting a piercing glow through the swirling shadows, yet the darkness defiantly surged forward, seeming to breathe, ready to claim its victims. Sarah's heart hammered in her chest. Just moments before, they had wielded the power of their memories, but the overwhelming force against them felt insatiable, like a beast starved for despair. "Stay with me," Dan shouted, pulling her closer as the energy crackled around them. The air shimmered with latent power that seemed at once a beacon and a warning. The connections to the past mingled with the threat of the unknown. The echoes of laughter faded to whispers, treacherous and contemptuous, as Sarah gripped Dan's hand tighter. They had come too far to give in now. She felt the weight of 1,000 eyes watching, hungry for failure. "Remember them," she urged, her voice steadying as she focused on the faces that flickered within her mind, the laughter of kids playing on the playground, the warmth of her mother's embrace, the victorious feelings following local town events where everyone joined as one. They were stories armed with light, each one a weapon against the encroaching shadows. "I remember," Dan shouted, his eyes fierce with resolve. "We won't let them take us." Together, they faced the malevolent heart of the dark entity, feeding it their hopes, their tears, and the laughter that reverberated through Maplewood. Each pulse of light connected to every lost soul, every shadow formed from heartache. Then, as if sensing their collective will, the shadows hesitated, swirling in confusion. The grotesque figure shrank momentarily, a flicker of its true form revealing the souls that had been trapped for decades. "Sarah," a voice broke through the din, the voice of Lily, soft and clear. "Don't let it win. We're counting on you, Lily." Sarah gasped, her eyes widening. The shadows snarled, but she could feel her sister's presences around her, a shield wrapped in love and determination. "We'll save you. Together." Dan's voice burst forth with renewed vigor, pumping energy into their shared resolve. One final push against the darkness. As the entity recoiled from the brightness they projected, Sarah and Dan took a step forward, their combined light intensifying until it pulsed like a heartbeat. They drew from every soul they could find, each memory a tether that stitched them closer to the light, weaving a tapestry powerful enough to send waves of warmth cascading through the darkness. And then beyond fear, there bloomed a monumental fury. A resounding cry for liberation echoed throughout the clearing, the force of their resurgence driving back the darkness. With every shred of connection shared, it grew stronger, the laughter turning jubilant, echoing through the forest like a melody of salvation. The figure lunged in one last desperate attempt, but its reach faltered. Each tendril of darkness shriveled and twisted, writhing against the emancipating onslaught of light. Finally, as the last vestiges of darkness dissipated, the air cleared, leaving behind a profound stillness that hummed with possibility. "Did we do it?" Sarah asked, breathless, gazing around as light flooded the clearing, illuminating the faces of those who had been lost. Each soul had a story etched in joy, grief, triumph, and all together they glowed with gratitude, their burdens lifted. The heavy weight of the shadows that once bedeviled Maplewood shattered, leaving only remnants of memory shimmering in the sunlight filtering through the trees. Dan turned to Sarah, his expression a blend of disbelief and relief. "We saved them, we really did." A moment of clarity washed over Sarah. "But what about us? What's next?" "I don't know," he replied softly, glancing over his shoulder at the altar's remnants, now nothing but crumbled stones. But we'll face it together. Sarah felt the warmth of hope blossom and expand within her. The shadows had been banished at last, and while uncertain what lay ahead, she understood that love holds the power to reclaim souls and chase away darkness. Wrapping her arms around Dan, Sarah whispered, "We've broken the cycle. We're free." Together, they walked out of the clearing, leaving the haunting echoes of their past behind, ready to forge a new beginning full of laughter and resilience. The sun bathed them in radiant gold, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Sarah smiled as she thought about the promise of tomorrow. But as they stepped beyond the edge of the woods, she caught a fleeting glance back. For a moment, in the vibrant crowd of lost souls tugging at her heart, she felt the shimmer of something sinister lingering in the periphery. Was it truly over? With that question echoing softly, she turned back to Dan, their featured paths forever intertwined. And in that moment, she knew the journey was far from finished. They had unearthed the truth, but beneath every shadow, another tale awaited. Shadows may linger, but light will always return. Do not forget, dear friends. You need to subscribe now to assure you catch the next exclusive tales unraveling the mysteries ahead. Smash that like button to fuel the algorithm, spreading these haunting narratives further. Flood the comments section with your reactions and thoughts about this conclusion. I'm dying to hear them all. And don't wait even one more second to share this video with at least 5 friends who need to experience this wrap-up. Remember, only true fans truly understand the importance of supporting the content that stirs our very souls. Let us make sure no one is left in the dark.